Hello and welcome to Trails Worth Hiking, the show that brings you some of the most interesting backpacking and trekking routes in the world. I'm your host, Jeremy Pendry. In the first part of the show, we bring you the story and history of a trail. Then we tell you what it's like to hike the trail and how you can do it. On this episode, we'll be hiking in a remote and beautiful desert canyon in the southwestern United States, where we'll hike a trail that is on indigenous-owned land, for a hike that takes us down to our destination rather than up into the mountains like in many other episodes. This hike will take us through a town that is only accessible on foot or by mule or helicopter to what many call the most isolated town in the United States, as we return to the Grand Canyon. But this isn't a hike down to the Colorado River within Grand Canyon National Park. This hike is to the beautiful blue-green waters of Havasu Falls within Havasu Canyon on the Havasupai Trail on the Havasupai Indian Reservation in Arizona. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thank you for joining me. We're going to start with our Walking the Walk segment, where we highlight listeners who have hiked a trail after listening to an episode about it and being inspired to go hike the trail. Let's start with Deepak Awasti, who recently concluded the Rota Vicentina Fisherman's Trail in Portugal, which we talked about on episode 10. He said it was an awesome coastal hike and he's never seen such beautiful and untouched beaches. He said there's absolutely no need of maps as the trail is very well marked. Most of the trail had beautiful flowers and the landscape changed every day. He said day one was pretty difficult because of a lot of beach walking. He really enjoyed all the great seafood that he had an opportunity to eat at the towns along the way. He said that although it's still a pretty untouched area, the number of tourists is increasing, so these towns are getting more used to tourists being there, for better or for worse. I posted some of Deepak's photos on the Instagram account at Trails Worth Hiking Podcast. So go there to check out some of Deepak's photos of the Rota Vicentina. Thanks to Deepak for letting us know about his hike. I also want to mention that listeners Aaron Renke and Penny Gilbert hiked the Kamano Kodo from episode 25. They hiked that the last week of April 2024 after hearing about it on the show. They said they were a couple of weeks late for peak cherry blossom season, but still saw some, and there were times that there were blossoms falling as they were walking, which sounds pretty cool. They commented on the large number of shrines, the beautiful forests, the mountains, waterfalls, and the onsens, which I had to look up, which means natural hot springs. They use Kumano Travel to book the trip, and they really enjoyed the guest houses they stayed at, especially guest house Kiyohime. They recommend staying at Hotel Urashima after you exit the trek, as they got to take a turtle boat to a sea cave onsen and view the mountains, and really just thought the hike was incredible altogether. I did post some of Aaron and Penny's photos on the Instagram account, so check those out there. And finally, I want to highlight Tracy Ankerfeld, who, after listening to the episode on the Tour de Mont Blanc, which I believe is episode 22, she and her friends decided to hike it. She mentioned the hike to her friend, who then read the guidebook and listened to the podcast episode. And then her friend was excited to go and then brought 3 more additional friends. So at the end, they had 6 of them hiking in July 2024. They found the episode helpful in preparing because it allowed them to feel like they could actually accomplish the trip. And that's one of the things that I really want people to get out of these episodes, which is the feeling that they can do it if others like them have done it. So there you go. Mission accomplished, and I'm glad that Tracy and her friends got out there and hiked the Tour de Mont Blanc. I do have some photos of their trip. I haven't yet posted them on the Instagram account, but I will do that soon. As always, keep the Walking the Walk reports and photos coming. They never fail to make my day. So congrats to Deepak, Aaron, and Penny, and Tracy for doing these treks, and thanks for sharing how it went with all of us. All right, I want to update you briefly on our Trails Worth Hiking Adventures trips that are coming in 2026, the trips to Costa Rica and Nepal. We've had a number of inquiries about these trips, which is great. And so here's a quick reminder about them and some updates. As a reminder, the Camino de Costa Rica trip, which we covered in episode 50, is a coast-to-coast adventure across Costa Rica. We're working with Emma Fry at Vegan Adventure Holidays to design what I think will be a great trip. The food on the hike will be vegan. That's what Emma's business is, but you obviously don't have to be vegan to enjoy the fantastic food that local small businesses will be providing to the trekkers along the way. There's a link to a form in the show notes where you can express interest in the trip. And thanks to those who have reached out so far. Please continue to do so if you are interested. So that said, for this trip to happen, I need to know if enough of you are willing to book the trip and put down your deposit. Because Costa Rica doesn't yet have deep trekking infrastructure, each trip is custom, and thus we really need to have people ready and willing to go to make it happen. So if you've expressed interest, or even if you haven't yet, and you want to go, please reach out to me to tell me that. I'll get a head count, and when we have sufficient people to make this happen, we'll open it up for bookings. The tentative dates are for March 2026, but the trip isn't going to happen unless several of you decide to commit to doing it. Emma at Vegan Adventure Holidays is ready and willing to set this up and book everything, but opening up for bookings, which she did for a short time before, means that she can only hold all the reservations for a limited time period. So I know it's several months away, 9 months away, something like that, to March 2026 when we're talking about doing this trip, but we really do need people to commit now and put down a deposit if they want to go on the trip. So reach out to me if you're ready to book, and if you are interested but haven't yet expressed interest in the trip, reach out to Emma through the form linked in the show notes, or just reach out to me and I'll get you in touch with her. In the end, if we get sufficient headcount, we'll go forward with it, and I hope we can do that. So that's Costa Rica. For our other trip to Nepal, we'll be hiking the Annapurna Base Camp Trek in October 2026, which will be a fantastic chance to hike one of the iconic and beautiful treks in Nepal and get a chance to see Kathmandu, its capital, and Pokhara, a beautiful lakeside city. Things are a little different for this trip because there is a significant trekking infrastructure for food and accommodations in Nepal. There's a bit more flexibility in how many people need to book for the trip to happen. That said, please book it now if you want to go. You won't regret it. Friend of the show, Tony Wong, and I are both going on this trip, and we have both trekked in Nepal with earthbound expeditions before and had a great experience. If you have questions or are ready to book, reach out to Rajan Simkata at Earthbound Expeditions. His email address is earthboundnpl@gmail.com. Earthboundnpl, as in Earthbound Nepal, earthboundnpl@gmail.com. He can answer all your questions and take your deposit to hold your spot. Rajan is fantastic and eager to help, so please reach out to him. Also, again, if you want to reach out to me and tell me that you're ready to commit to going on the trip, that would be helpful as well, so I can keep a head count. These trips are both chances of a lifetime, and I hope you'll join me on them. All right, last preliminary note before we jump into the episode is I want to remind you that our listener discount code is back on everything at Outdoor Herbivore. The discount code for listeners of Trails Worth Hiking is TWH10P, so TWH10P, which means, of course, Trails Worth Hiking 10%. So stock up for your upcoming summer trips on great backpacking meals. They're vegan and vegetarian backpacking meals, but of course you don't have to be a vegan or vegetarian to love these high quality meals that, as you all know, say it with me, they're loaded with calories for a hungry hiker. They cook easily and boil in a bag. Packaging, and as I said, use high quality ingredients. Just want to remind you that Outdoor Herbivore not only has great hot breakfasts and dinners, but also has delicious cold soak lunches, which I used extensively during my Colorado Trail thru hike last summer. They also sell snacks. They sell bulk ingredients if you want to make your own meals, and they have worldwide shipping. So go to outdoorherbivore.com to check it out. All right, our guest on this episode is listener Eric Spamer, who hiked the Havasupai Trail with a group of friends. We've covered the Grand Canyon once before in episode 30, but that was in Grand Canyon National Park. In this episode, we'll be talking about another highly sought-after permit, but on Native American land. And the objective here is waterfalls and relaxation in one of the largest side canyons that feeds into the Grand Canyon, rather than a massive descent to the Colorado River like we did in episode 30. A little note on nomenclature. During the outset of the interview, you'll hear that I wasn't clear on the nomenclature here, so let me clarify that up front. The trail, as the name of the episode says, is the Havasupai Trail. The primary waterfall at the destination is Havasu Falls, not Havasupai, as I said mistakenly during the interview. And the name of the tribe and reservation is Havasupai. And the name of the town where the tribe lives is Supai. Okay, so there we go. Those are all the names. We'll talk about what those words mean, and I hope that will clarify the differences. So first off, is this hike in the Grand Canyon? Well, the answer is yes and no. It's not in Grand Canyon National Park, and it's not hiking down to the Colorado River running down the middle of the main part of the Grand Canyon, though it is a hike into a canyon and creek that are part of the Grand Canyon itself. Havasu Canyon is where Havasu Creek, which is also called Cataract Creek, flows. That creek is the second largest tributary to the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. Havasu Creek and the canyon are the drainage basin for about 3,000 square miles around the area. One of the prominent features of Havasu Creek is the presence of travertine formations. Travertine is limestone formed when water high in calcium carbonate comes from hot springs. As the water cools, it forms new rock. In Havasu Creek, the travertine forms dams that make pools in the creek, as well as interesting layered formations that are near the waterfalls. It can be white or yellowish or even reddish. The big highlight feature of Havasu Canyon is the waterfalls. Our guest Eric will walk us through the various waterfalls and how to see them, but let me briefly mention them here. Havasu Falls is the highlight. The word Havasu means blue-green water, and the water indeed has an impressive blue-green color. Havasu Falls has one main chute that drops about 90 to 100 feet off a vertical cliff into a series of pools that are formed by travertine dams. It's the high calcium carbonate content of the water in the pools that gives the water its color. The appearance, though, of Havasu Falls has changed many times over the last century or so, and is changing yet again even now. The changes are due to intense seasonal flooding that can happen in this area. So just to give you an idea of how drastically Havasu Falls has changed due to floods, before 1910, it was a sheet of waterfalls, and it was even called Bridal Veil Falls at the time. It had a very different appearance than it does today. The notch the water flows through now first appeared after a flood in 1910, so it completely changed the waterfall. And after that, the waterfall was at times multiple streams and not the single continuous stream that is there now. Also, many of the travertine pools have been destroyed by flooding as well, though some of them have been restored by man-made damming. Another tall single-stream waterfall is Mooney Falls, which was named after a miner that apparently fell to his death from the falls in the 1880s. There is also Beaver Falls, which is the farthest from the campground, and is really a series of smaller waterfalls that makes up a longer cascade. Up until 2008, there was Navajo Falls, but flooding rerouted the creek, and that waterfall now is really just a rock formation without any water. There is 50-Foot Falls, which has appeared and reappeared several times over the years, and last reappeared in 1970 and is still there now. There's also Lower Navajo Falls, which is also called Rock Falls, which was created by flooding in 2008. So as you can see, flooding is a fact of life in Havasu Canyon, and it's constantly reshaping the canyon. In September 1990, they had some of the most severe flooding in memory. I mentioned already 2008, where the character of the waterfalls changed quite a bit. 400 people were stranded in the canyon due to flooding in 2008. When those waterfalls were dramatically changed by the flooding. In more recent times, there's been a number of flooding incidents. In 2018, 200 people were evacuated by helicopter. In 2019, flooding closed the trail for the season. In 2023, a bridge was washed away and 40 hikers had to be evacuated by helicopter. And last year, in 2024, 100 hikers were stranded and one woman even died after being swept away by flooding. And finally, now in June 2025, just a few days ago, there was significant flooding in the canyon. And the images I saw online showed the blue-green waters of Havasu Falls turning into a torrent of red-brown mud coming over the falls. I'm not trying to dissuade you from doing this hike, by the way. This is a fantastic hike and you should try to do it, and I would like to do it. But you do need to take the weather report seriously, more seriously than on any other hike probably, because it can drastically impact your trip. As I think many of you know, this is generally true for hikes in these kinds of canyons in the southwestern United States where flash floods are a real risk. That said, I also see this as an opportunity to learn. It's an example of the constant change that is all around us all the time, the impermanence of everything, as they say in Buddhism. So when you see a place like this, keeping the inevitability of change in mind may help you to appreciate it even more. The beautiful waterfall you're seeing may not exist in a generation, or even in a year, or even tomorrow for that matter. Havasu Canyon, in many ways, is no different than the rest of our planet, but the pace of change is just that much faster and that much more intense. Going to Havasu Canyon is a chance to witness geologic and geographical change that is virtually impossible to see in our lifetimes in other parts of the world. So even the regular destruction and rebirth of this canyon is part of its allure, to me at least. Despite the precarious nature of the landscape in Havasu Canyon, people have lived in the area for a long time and still make the canyon their home. Those people are the Havasupai, or literally the people of the blue-green water. The Havasupai have lived in the Grand Canyon for at least the past 800 years. Traditionally, they practice hunting, gathering, and also some seasonal agriculture of corn, beans, squash, melons, tobacco, and even cotton. They used irrigation built from Havasu Creek to raise their crops. They farmed in the canyon in spring and summer and moved to the plateaus above the canyon for fall and winter for hunting and gathering. They speak a Yuman Kochini language called Havasupai Hualapai, which they share with the Hualapai people, who are closely related. Though the languages aren't actually identical, but they do share the same grammar, but they have some different sounds and words between the two groups, so they can be considered separate languages. There are several hundred tribe members today who are speakers of the Havasupai variant of the language, which is basically all of the members of the tribe. The language is considered endangered because there are so few speakers in total number. But what's amazing is that even today, basically all of the Havasupai people speak their language. And that is actually unique among indigenous languages in the United States. It's just not the case with other indigenous peoples that they all speak their native language. And as someone who loves to learn languages, I just think that's pretty cool that their language is universally spoken by the tribe, even if it is a small tribe in number. The first recorded encounter between the tribe and Europeans was in 1776 with Spanish priest Francisco Garces. But the first big impact by Europeans on the tribe was when silver was discovered in Cataract Creek in 1870. This brought a lot of prospectors to the area, and they got very limited protection for their land from the government at the time. In 1882, President Chester Arthur turned the land on the plateau above the canyon into federal land. This left only about 500 acres in the canyon itself for the Havasupai, and obviously destroyed their semi-nomadic seasonal way of living. That remaining land was turned into what was called the Havasupai Indian Reservation. Lack of remaining game and European disease further decimated the tribe, and at one point there were only about 150 members left. The Havasupai fought the government for taking their land, and finally in 1968 won a case that found that their land had been illegally taken. And then in 1975, President Gerald Ford signed a law that put in trust 185,000 acres for the Havasupai, and they were granted the right to use another 95,000 acres. Today, the tribe has over 700 members, and about 400 to 500 of them live on the reservation in Supai village. Supai, the town, has been called the most remote community in the contiguous United States. So probably the most remote outside of maybe some very remote communities in Alaska. The village is 8 miles by trail from the nearest road, and that road is quite far from the nearest other community. The mail is carried in by mule. They have a cafe, a lodge, and a general store in the town. And the village does have a school for grades kindergarten through 8th grade. Once the kids get to high school age, they have to go off to a boarding school. Tourism is a big part of the tribe's economy. They lead tours and mule packing operations into and out of the canyon, as we'll hear about from Eric. They also, of course, run the campground and issue hiking permits, which we'll also hear about. They've had tourists coming into the canyon since the reservation was founded in the 1880s. They built the campground where hikers camp in the 1960s. And they've had an online reservation system since 2017. During the summer months, they get 500 visitors per day in the canyon, and they get about 25,000 visitors per year. As you can imagine, the periodic flooding we've talked about can be devastating to the local economy, and they aren't getting rich off tourism, but it does help to sustain them. With that background, let's listen to my conversation with Eric Spamer about his hike on the Havasupai Trail. Eric Spamer, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Eric, we're going to be talking about the Havasupai Falls trek in Arizona, but I'm just curious how you got into backpacking and if you've done some other backpacking before or other trekking before doing this trip.
Yeah, I was a late bloomer. A lot of my friends were into it, and I didn't want to miss out. So I was a little nervous at first to get into it, but once I got going, I caught the bug. I think Mount Whitney was my first trip, and Half Dome and Clouds Rest, which I know you've talked about before on episodes. I've done those separately, but that's a pretty epic hike that you have an episode on. I'm doing those together. And then that just increased more and more to doing an Everest Base Camp trek with friends, and now we're planning a big group trip to do about half of the Tour de Mont Blanc this summer.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I think it's cool that you're doing both trekking and backpacking. And as you know from the show, that's something that I advocate, that people should try both. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Sometimes people are too doctrinaire about only wanting to do wilderness hiking and not staying in hostels or tea houses or those kinds of treks, which I think are great, like the Everest Base Camp trek. And then other people sometimes who do only hostel to hostel or hut to hut are a little bit intimidated by camping on the trail and having everything you need on your back all times. And so even though you're relatively new to the whole idea, I think it's cool that you're already doing both.
It's amazing that it's the refugios and huts make it more accessible for a lot of different hikers. Our Nepal trip had a lot of people in their 60s and maybe even early 70s. And I just love that. But still, while I'm relatively young, trying to carry a pack on my bag sometimes as well.
Exactly. Okay. So let's talk about Havasupai Falls. How did you learn about this opportunity and come to do that?
I am not good at social media, so I had not seen the millions of beautiful turquoise photos of the waterfall. So a friend got the reservation. She was absolutely elated. I had no idea how big of a deal it was to get one of these sought-after reservations. I looked at one or two photos, and I was hooked.
And you were hooked because the photos we've all seen of this are just of the beautiful color of the water, the red rock, and this huge, thick waterfall coming into it. And that kind of says it all, right?
It really does. And I thought there was fake, filters on social media and all of that are real, I presume. But in this case, when I saw it in real life, it was just as beautiful. And knowing that she had a reservation for 10 people, I knew this would be such a wonderful group trip, which is really something I love doing, sharing these memories with a lot of friends.
So that's pretty cool. And I guess you took out the hardest part of it, right? The hardest part of this whole trip is getting the permit. So can you talk a little bit about, I know that you didn't have to do it and you had a friend that actually was able to get the permit, but what's your understanding about what that process is like to get into the lottery and how that all works?
I think most people will tell you, be ready on February 1st, have as many devices and friends as possible, open up multiple tabs, do all that. I think those are good tips. A better tip is she actually won the pre-sale reservation. So that's mid-December to early January. You pay a non-refundable fee, and that's how we secured our permit, not the very, very frustrating 7 a.m. Pacific time every year on February 1st as the Havasupai website goes down and you're just clicking refresh. I think that's how most people experience it, but I would highly recommend checking out the pre-sale every year.
That's interesting. So not only do they have this crazy lottery system like a lot of very popular trails, but they actually have like a premium version of the crazy lottery where you go a couple months even before that and they're in a separate lottery.
It feels like a hack. I don't know. Maybe this will help out some people.
I'm afraid to ask how much that extra premium is.
The hike itself is expensive. I think what you're losing is the non-refundable aspect of it.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're paying a premium or not. I'll have to check.
Okay. So what did you do besides your friend getting the permit for everyone to go? What did you do in thinking about how to prepare for this trip and plan for it?
There's a lot that goes into it. A lot of my backpacking trips, we've been able to drive up and just start trekking, which has been wonderful. Maybe a few campsite reservations here and there. But for this trip, you really have to plan a lot more because it's a 4 to 5 hour drive from Phoenix or Vegas. We flew into Vegas, which involves a whole lot of other planning if you're going to enjoy your time there. And you want to strategically get a hotel not too far. There's really nothing close to the trailhead. So securing a hotel, there's 2 or 3 options nearby. So you want to secure that reservation and really plan out a lot of timing of things. When you're going to pick up your permit, when you're going to start your trek, that sort of thing. So there was actually a lot of organization going on.
So for people who haven't been to this area, tell us a little bit about what this area is like. What I just heard you say that is actually interesting is it's fairly remote. I mean, you've got to go into one of these big cities to get there, but then you're actually pretty far away from anything by the time you actually get to where the trail is. So what does this area look like? What are you going to see when you come to the trailhead at Havasupai Falls?
Yeah, so you'll be coming to the trailhead. You'll have picked up your permit by 5 p.m. the night before your hike. Highly recommend doing that. Otherwise, you have to pick it up at 8 a.m. the day of your hike, and that's way too many hours after you should have started this hike. So you're going to approach the trailhead in pitch blackness.
It's not because of the heat, because you're going downhill into the canyon when you start. Is this because of trying to get a good campsite, or is it the heat also? Or what's the reason for starting so early?
Both those reasons.
Okay.
You want to avoid the heat as much as possible. It's going to be flat by the time it gets hot, no matter when you start. So
okay.
The hike back out is going to be even more important for timing, but it's also to get a great campsite. I haven't done a good job of explaining this, but the campsites roll over every day. So everyone there is going to be there for about 4 days. One of the days is a hike in, one of the days is a hike out. So you're getting a 25% turnover every single day. So you know when you arrive at the campsite, a quarter of the camps are open and you want to grab a great one.
Let's back up and explain this for people. The way this works is you basically have a permit for 3 nights, right? So it's not, a lot of people might go on a hiking trip like this and they go down for 1 night and then they come back out. The way this works is you're paying, as we'll talk about, a pretty hefty fee, and that gets you 3 full nights. So people are going down there, staying, and then doing some extra exploring once they're there. Is that how this works?
Absolutely. And the hike in is wonderful, but you are going to want to use all 3 nights. Not only to get the bang for your buck, because as you mentioned, it is expensive, but it is just such a wonderful time. So I would be surprised if anyone leaves before their 3 nights.
Okay. And so what does this look like? I mean, we all know kind of what the Grand Canyon looks like for those of us who have been there or just seen it in movies or TV or in photos. But what is this part, which is a little bit different? You know, we're not in the national park, but we're sort of upriver, I think, from the national park. What does the area that you're going into look like?
Yeah, so you'll be driving in. It'll probably be pitch black. You're at the top of a cliff and you'll start hiking down some switchbacks. It'll be gorgeous with the stars above, and you'll just see these big canyon walls, red sandstone cliffs. You probably won't be able to tell how beautiful and colorful they are in the night, but slowly the sun will start rising as you're going down the switchbacks, or maybe you've made it down to the switchbacks and you have a long flat canyon hike, and just these gorgeous red sandstone cliffs creating a nice canyon walk. Eventually that all just drastically changes into a vibrant oasis.
How far is it before you actually get to the oasis part where there's actually water?
It's a 10-mile hike total. Maybe a couple miles of the switchbacks, which are wonderfully easy going down, and just a little bit harder as you make your way back up.
Yeah, sure.
And then it's going to be relatively flat for about 6 miles until you reach the town. That's where the Havasupai people are based, and you pick up a permit there. That office opens at 8 a.m. And then you just have another 2 miles to Havasu Falls. And during that 2 mile stretch is really when you start seeing things magically transform. And when you get to that first waterfall, actually you'll pass a few waterfalls off to the side that don't look like much, but we'll talk about those as incredible day trips. But when you get to Havasu Falls, things just turn turquoise water, green. It's just such a transformation, and it's amazing.
The falls themselves called Havasupai or Havasu?
Havasu Falls is the big first 100-foot waterfall. You'll see cascading into those the blue-green pools you may have seen on social media.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about the village, because this is something that you have in probably no other hike in the United States, where you hike into a backcountry for many miles, and then you come across an actual town. But I think it's the most remote town anywhere in the U.S. It's no access to any road. Talk a little bit about what Supai Village is like.
Yeah, I think we saw some mules carrying Amazon packages around, and
that's fantastic.
They ask you not to take photos. They ask you to keep wearing a mask, at least as of May 2024. So I would check in on the rules and please adhere to those. Havasupai people have done so much to make this land accessible, and so it's just a joy being there. We were surprised by the level of poverty that exists. Seemingly, they could open this up and make the reservations, double the amount of reservations and have more money for the town, but I think there's a big eye on sustainability, and you see flash floods happen, and that affects the infrastructure there. So I think it's a fine balance on how many people you come through and don't come through. But yeah, the town is interesting. We didn't get to interact with any of the people that live there other than getting our permit. That would have been a really interesting situation. Would have loved to learn more about their daily lives. One way you can interact with maybe a local custom is by enjoying some Indian fry bread. We were never able to do that. There's a hut at the top of Havasu Falls that has a pretty funny sign. I don't remember the exact language, but essentially it's, we're either here or not here. And they were not there for us, unfortunately. But enjoying the Indian fry bread is one good way to support the tribe.
From a more logistical perspective, does the town have amenities, for example, like a grocery store or things like that?
Maybe some snacks where you pick up the permit. But of course, you're 2 miles away from where you're going to be camping, and you're really the opposite direction from some of the most fun day trips. So you'll probably only encounter the town passing through. Mm-hmm. There is what we call the camp store right when you reach the campground, and everything there is free. And that's just stuff people do not want to trek back out.
The camp store is like a hiker box, essentially.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay. With two tribesmen hanging out, smiling. So I do take that back. We did get to interact with them, and they were wonderful. I think they were laughing at how excited we were by finding old shoes. And our friend actually got a fairly new pair of shoes that are his new hiking shoes. I don't know what that person hiked out of. Havasu. Maybe they're still there.
Maybe sandals. I don't know. Maybe they hiked out in sandals.
Yeah, maybe. But that had some leftover food and the sort of things where people overpack a little bit. And the hike back up is not easy. So dump as much weight as possible at the friendly store.
Did you see any wildlife during this trip?
Yeah, we saw just a pair of bighorn sheep on one of the side treks, and that was it. But it was magnificent. They were. Yeah. I didn't realize how impressed I would be by the bighorn sheep.
Was one of them a ram with the actual big horns?
Oh yeah.
Oh cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat to see. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the logistics to understand kind of how this would work. So when is the best time of year to do this hike?
We went in May, which I highly recommend. I think spring and fall are great. That helps you avoid the summer monsoons, which is a really, really scary flash flood danger. I think this past summer had some really scary footage of that. And it also avoids the heat. So I do not recommend June, July, and August, even if you can snag a reservation. So aim for April, May, and maybe the fall as well, so you can enjoy swimming and cooler temperatures.
Okay. And we said this is about 20 miles round trip. It's about 10 to get down to the village, and it's basically an out and back, right? You're just going back out the same way.
with some fun day trips as well. Yep.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those. So what are the opportunities to see other things while you're down there?
Yeah, so your 4 days, it's nice to have some constraints on a trip, right? Everyone has different things going on with their lives. In this case, we're going 4 days. Add 2 days for the flight in and out of Vegas. So it's already made for you, right? You know it's going to be a week-long trip. So some of that planning is out of the way. When you arrive, day one, your early hike in, find your amazing camp, set up camp, and go back to Havasu Falls, which is that beautiful waterfall you first saw walking in, and just enjoy your day there, relax. So the side trips, you got to do those on days 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
I asked our group of 10 amazing people what they thought were some highlights of the trip, and day 2 came up again and again. So our day 2 started off by waking up early, upgrading our camp a little bit, as our neighbors had moved on. Unfortunately, their reservation was all done. So we scooted on over, and our camp was now situated along the water, and it was just amazing. We just had our own giant swimming pool there. But you asked about the day hike, so let's focus on that. So there are 5 main waterfalls in the area. And day 2, I highly recommend checking out Mooney Falls and Beaver Falls.
Okay.
So to get down to Mooney Falls, it is one of the most unique hiking experiences I've ever had. You stand in a big line at the top of a cliff. Actually, you're at the top of a cliff and you see this gorgeous waterfall. And then you make your way down the cliff a little bit and you enter a tunnel. And you're just in this cave, a cavernous tunnel, stuck in a line. Is
this a man-made tunnel?
Maybe the waterfall used to go through. Maybe it is man-made. It
Not
must
clear.
be man-made, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just an incredible experience. And what you're doing is you're waiting for people that are very, very scared to be climbing down some chains, essentially, because it's a pretty steep climb. So, one person might be stuck on the chains for a while. And I think we were up there 30, 45 minutes just waiting in the cave for someone to go. So that's at the very start of your hike. So it might make sense to start early. Another reason you want to start early is because the end destination of this hike is Beaver Falls, which is incredible. 2 people in our group mentioned this to me in text that was their favorite part of the hike. However, you really want to get there early because the Red Canyon walls, they'll block out the sun by, depending on the time of year, but for us, 2 p.m.
Okay.
And it's way too cold to swim by then. So get there early, avoid the big line of everyone climbing down the sketchy chains. Check out the bighorn sheep on your walk. It's 6 miles round trip to Beaver Falls.
Okay.
And just spend the day enjoying yourself at Beaver Falls.
Is Mooney Falls in the same direction, or is that a different hike?
Yeah, so that's going to be one hike. Mooney Falls is basically at the end of the campground. The campground, I think, is a mile long. It's at least a half mile. So situate yourself somewhere in the middle. It doesn't really matter because at one end will be Havasu Falls and the camp store. At the other end will be Mooney Falls. So it doesn't really matter where you are, but I like to think of Mooney Falls as the start of your trek. 3 miles down with a bunch of river crossings is Beaver Falls. And then 3 miles back will get you back to Mooney Falls, where the hike up the chains is so much easier because no one's scared. Everyone's already done it, and going up is way easier than going down.
Okay, and what about, you said there's actually more than just this day hiking opportunity. There's another one you could do the other day that you have down there.
Yeah, so I can't wait to tell you about day 3. The one asterisk on day 2 is if you don't want this to be a fun, relaxing trip, if you want, you have this big 10-mile hike in, you could have a day 2 that's another 18 miles, and that's where people go to the confluence.
Okay.
So it's where the Havasu Creek and Colorado River merge.
I see.
We skip that, but that is, you get to do Mooney, you go past Beaver, and then you keep going another 5 miles to make it 16 or 18 miles total. I don't recommend that because it's just so wonderful to enjoy swimming in Mooney and Beaver Falls. But yes, day 3. So a few members of our group just sat in hammocks at our campsite, enjoyed day 3. We had a beautiful campground, doing nothing. That's amazing. There's not a lot of backpacking trips where you just get to sit around and swim and enjoy the beautiful scenery. The other half of our group went. I mentioned there's some waterfalls you first see off to the side that are in between the village and Havasu Falls. They don't really look like much, but I really recommend going back and checking them out. So that would be 50-foot Falls and Navajo Falls. And there's one called Secret Falls, but I can't tell you about that because that's secret, obviously.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely go back and bring your water shoes because you're going to be ankles deep in water and at some points waist deep in water, swimming and enjoying these beautiful falls with a really, really easy day hike from the campground.
Okay, that brings me to the next question, which you mentioned water shoes. What are some of the gear considerations for this trip besides your sort of standard backpacking gear? And it sounds like one of those is water shoes.
Definitely water shoes. You're going to really want those for the Mooney Falls, Beaver Falls hike. Absolutely a swimsuit, maybe some dry bags because some of the river crossings, especially to Beaver Falls, are waist deep.
Okay.
Gloves were highly recommended for the climb down to Mooney Falls, but you'll also see there'll probably be piles and piles of them at the top of the hike because people don't want to carry those out. For us, there was a water source at the start of the campground that had amazing water. So bringing a giant jug was really nice because, as I mentioned, the campground is very long. So to have a giant jug of water for us to enjoy at camp was well worth it. Some friends noted the string lights really added some atmosphere, helped us make friends in camp with all the other people with their string lights set up. And sun protection as well, because you're in the desert.
Yeah, don't forget your string lights. That's important. Yeah. My friend Tony that I hike with a lot, he brings those now when we go hiking, and I actually do enjoy having those up. Like he strings them between our two tents in the evening, and it's not a bad ambiance setter.
Shout out to Tony. I feel like I know Tony just from listening to the podcast. I didn't think of him as a string light guy, but now I love him even more.
All right. One of the things that I thought was an interesting option is that there's actually the possibility to rent mules to carry your gear if you don't want to carry it yourself. Can you talk a little bit about what that is or how that works to the extent you know anything about that part of it?
Yes. So 2 members of our crew hired a mule. There's a lot of positives. Makes the hike much more accessible. Which, a side note, I think there's also a hotel in the village and helicopters in the village. So this is not the podcast for that. I know this is more adventurers wanting to hike. But the mules do help you, especially if you've had a recent injury or back problems like some members of our crew did have. There's some downsides. They're pretty expensive. I think you pay for maybe 4 packs or the equivalent of 4 packs, and you have to buy that much. And I don't remember the exact fee, but it's pretty high. The drop-offs are at the top of Havasu Falls, so you're not really at camp. So the 2 people that hired a mule were kind of at Havasu Falls by themselves, waiting for the pack, stuck in the sun, not really sure. And we were one of the first people to leave. We were at the trailhead at 3:30 a.m. or 4 a.m. They dropped off their packs at the very front of the trailhead, but still they were stuck waiting. And then, of course, on the back end, that happens as well. So you've had a hard 10-mile hike. You've done 2 miles of intense switchbacks, most likely in the heat, because you can't wake up early enough to avoid the heat by the end of a 10-mile hike. And now you're stuck sort of waiting around at the top of the hike for the mules to come with your bags. Not the best situation, but if you have to use them, it's great that it's an option.
I guess I would really only recommend that, it sounds like, for somebody who has maybe a serious physical limitation, like a shoulder problem or something, where they really can't carry a pack. Otherwise, it seems like that's an extra hassle and a significant expense.
Really, I totally agree. And really, the 2 miles up these tough switchbacks at the end of your trip is really the hardest part of this hike. So, you're going downhill the way in. It's going to be nice and cool most of the hike your way in. And, by the time you're hiking out, you've eaten a lot of your food.
Right. This
is a much easier backpack. In days 2 and 3, you're hiking with nothing at all. This is a much easier backpacking trip than a lot of the ones you've featured.
Yeah, I've got the stats on the first 2 miles, by the way. It's an 1,800-foot drop in the first 2 miles, and the entire trip is only 2,158. So basically all of your elevation is on those switchbacks.
Yeah, you have 300 feet in 8 miles the rest of the way.
Exactly, yes. All right. And what about food storage? Are there boxes or is it just sort of bring your own food storage, like a rat sack or something like that, or an sack to protect against, I don't know, squirrels or birds or whatever might be there?
Yeah, it's bring your own. Highly recommended according to the rules there. We had no issues with animals, but we read a lot situations where people did have those problems. Even at like Beaver Falls and Mooney Falls, when you're not at your campground, critters come in to steal your food or nibbling through your pack. So when we are outside of our campground and not with our bear canister or rat sacks, we had just Tupperware for our daily sandwiches to keep the squirrels at bay.
Okay, that makes sense. And from a navigation perspective, it sounds like it doesn't get any easier. And basically, there's just one trail, right?
It's very easy. I think there's one junction a little bit before Havasu Falls. Don't go right, go left. No problem at all with navigation. If you're doing day 3, if you're doing Navajo and 50 foot, just make friends around camp that have been there a day or two and ask. It's a great conversation starter. I think it would be possible to get lost on that day. You know where the waterfalls are, you're just not really sure where the trail is, so you'll eventually get there, but that might be worth just asking around. I don't think you have to do planning ahead of time, though.
And so we may have covered this a little bit already, but just to be sure, what did you do for accommodations the night before to get your early start?
Yeah, so the night before the hike, or rather the day before, we drove from Las Vegas, stopped at the Hoover Dam, which was a delightful stop, and then we stayed at the Wallapai Lodge. A pro tip for that is there's a railroad tracks on one side, a very, very loud railroad that a train that goes all night, apparently. So we just asked to stay on the non-train side, which was a pro tip we had read about. So that is in Peach Springs. There was a gas station in town. I think it was closed. So just a heads up, you probably want to load your tank up completely with gas ahead of time. And for EV charging, I'm really not sure in the area. So have a full tank. And that is still maybe 60 to 90 minutes from the trailhead. So that is one of the 2 closest hotels. The other being in a town that's past where you pick up your permit. So stay at one of those so you have the shortest drive possible to the trailhead in the morning, but it still won't be a short drive.
Okay. So let's get to the tough question here for this one, which is how much is the permit for camping?
Yeah, so I think this year it's up to $455 per person for the 3 nights. And when you add on the flight to Vegas or Phoenix, and the Wallapai Lodge is not necessarily cheap, but still a good value, I think. This is not a cheap backpacking trip, but definitely worth it. Absolutely worth it. And as we mentioned earlier, the tribe is really trying to create a sustainable tourism model. So helping to support that, even though if you don't go, they'll surely fill the reservation. You should try to go.
Yeah, and there's no reason not to help this tribe financially. Like you said, it seems like there's still quite a bit of poverty, and they have this amazing resource on their property. And like you said, they're actually controlling entry when they could make it a lot easier and make a lot more money. So to me, it does make sense to not worry too much about a $455 fee for 3 nights. $150 a night's not the end of the world for something as fantastic as this. One of the things I looked up was the hotel that's in Supai Village. So like you said, there are actually accommodations in the village. Those are like something like $2,500 for 3 nights.
Oh my goodness.
It's some insane amount.
Wow.
So yeah, you're definitely better off camping.
Yeah. I like your $150 per night metric. I don't know anywhere else in the world that is as beautiful for $150 a night, or really any amount higher than that. It's tough to beat. And supporting the Havasupai tribe is great. I know the land was taken away from them and they had to fight for it. And I think their land, 90 or 95% of the land was taken from them, and they got some land back in the 1970s. But yeah, the tribe's definitely been through a lot, and I'm so glad they share this land with us because it's gorgeous.
All right. And just so we finish up thinking about the way the hike works, as you said, get up early the last day, get out of there so that you're up the switchbacks before it's ridiculously hot. Is that basically the goal?
Nailed it. Yep.
Okay. All right. So why we've talked about this a little, I think I know, but why is this a trip worth doing versus, well, let me make it a tougher question. Why is this a trip worth doing in this area versus the other Grand Canyon opportunities that might be out there? There are lots of opportunities to do some pretty amazing hikes out there. What's special about this region?
Yeah, I think it's the contrasts or the juxtapositions, the best of both worlds is maybe another way of saying it, where you get the adventure plus relaxation. You get the beautiful red canyons with the turquoise water. I've never done the rim to rim or some of the other epic hikes. I've been lucky to be at the south rim of the Grand Canyon and see how gorgeous it is, but there's no waterfall right next to it that I get to swim in with all my friends. And, it's for some of those hikes, it's big hike, big hike, big hike. This is big hike, swim in a pool. It's a nice balance.
That's perfect. Is there a particular moment or memory that stands out for you from this trip?
Yeah, so I think relaxing in the beautiful waters at Beaver Falls after a nice 3-mile hike in there. That was a highlight for a lot of the members of the group. Climbing the chains at Mooney Falls is just so unique, and it just gets your adrenaline pumping.
And is there anything that you would have done differently, or if you advised others to do this trip, after you having done it, that you would think that they should do differently from what you did?
We didn't make it to Beaver Falls early enough. It would have been great to have more time there. So I really highlight that day 2, leave very early, beat the crowds going down the chain so you get more time at Beaver Falls. Some other friends mentioned bringing more snacks, right? We were lucky to have an incredible group of 10. It's such a fun thing to share food and see what people brought and debate unnecessarily about which brand of dehydrated food is better. So it's just that was fun. And then another friend mentioned a cooler in the car for when you return. I think there's no way things would be still cold by the time you get back after the 10 miles and 3 days. But having some refreshments at the end of your big trek up the switchbacks is something maybe we could have improved upon.
Yeah, those are all good ideas. I do think it's kind of neat when you have a trip like this where there's a lot of time in camp, where you have a lot of hanging out, for everybody to bring some sort of, happy hour treat, for lack of a better way of describing it. But, having something that they can share with everybody when you're in camp.
It's great. And this isn't you really don't have to count every ounce in your pack for this hike. So bring some splurge items for sure.
Yeah. And if you don't want to carry it out, just make sure you eat it all.
Yeah. Or make a friend eat it. Yeah.
All right, Eric. Well, thank you for telling me about this trip. It's been really great to hear about it. But while I've got you, I have a few more questions, if you don't mind.
I love it. Yes.
Okay. What is the most unexpected thing that's ever happened while you were out backpacking or hiking?
Yeah. So I think we're not quite neighbors, but I don't think we live too far apart here. So I think you and I have trekked a lot of the same places. So maybe you've been out around Point Reyes. And there's some beautiful backpacking there and some great day hikes. So my wife and I were on a day hike one time at Coast Campground, and we saw a sign that said a mountain lion had just killed a deer at campground number 7. It just put images in our head. Like, it's a pretty popular campground. There's a good chance someone was at campground 7 listening to the craziest mountain lion deer noises ever. And I'm just glad we weren't there that night. But yeah, that was unexpected.
Did you see anything? Was there because sometimes I've actually seen a mountain lion killed before, where you see like a half buried deer covered in leaves, where it's like half eaten and half not. Because that's what they do. They essentially eat part of it over a few days. They eat it over like a week, and they'll cover it up. Oh. I've seen that before. And whenever I've seen something like that, which happened, well, I can only think of one time that's happened. So the time that it happened, you don't want to linger too long in that spot.
Yes.
Because they're not too far away, but you didn't actually see the kill.
We should have stopped by campsite. It felt like a crime scene that we weren't supposed to be a part of. Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't stop by campsite 7 and say, where is this thing? Okay.
No. But it is, there's some amazing backpacking campgrounds all around that area. And I'm a little nervous to start.
Okay. What's the next trip on your list?
Yeah, I think I mentioned at the top, we're going to do about half of the Tour de Mont Blanc, which I know you have a great episode on. Really excited to be doing that in August. And that has also inspired, hopefully, some more planning of hut-to-hut travel, perhaps in Northern California. I found a book about it at the library, and I've really just been kind of brainstorming my own ideas of this seems only possible in Nepal or New Zealand or many places around Europe, but I think it might be possible in the Bay Area as well. So I'm going to see if I can put together a little local hut-to-hut.
I love that. That's something that I've thought about a lot too, having done some of these trips overseas. A couple of years ago, I did this one episode where I did a hike every month for a year. And one of those hikes, I just did an out and back on the Dipsea Trail in Marin. So I got an Airbnb in a tent cabin down at Stinson Beach and just stayed for a night there and then hiked back. And I just sort of made it my own little hut-to-hut hike. I went to a restaurant for dinner, went out for breakfast, and, it was kind of like showing up in a town, getting to explore the town and then heading back, but all just, designed by myself to figure out a way to make that happen, here in Northern California. And I do think that's possible. For example, the trekking company that I've used a couple of times in Europe also has a trek from Santa Cruz to Monterey, where you stay in small inns for 3 nights or something. And it's a 4-day hike along that entire bay. And, so you can design those kinds of trips almost anywhere. And if you're looking for something that's a little bit more wilderness, there are the High Sierra camps in Yosemite where you can do 5 different camps over a 50-mile loop. That's a hard reservation to get as well. But that's another one. I did that loop with my son, but we just backpacked because we didn't have the reservations. But that's an opportunity to do that too, because they have a dining hall where they provide food and you have, a bed every night, even though it's in a tent cabin. So there are ways to make that happen, I think, in the United States more than people think.
That is amazing and inspiring for sure. With the High Sierras, are you able to eat lunch if you don't have a sleeping reservation?
I believe you can reserve a lunch to go and they prepare it for you and then you take it for the day. And like a lot of the European refuges do the same thing. And you probably pay an extra fee for that. I don't know if it's included, but essentially I think they will make you a lunch. Don't quote me on that. I could be completely wrong, but I seem to remember that that's the way it worked because they're anticipating that people are going to do this loop and that they will need a lunch. So you don't have to bring full backpacking gear. You've just basically bringing like day hiking gear plus, essentially, because the bedding is there, the food is there, so you can do it that way. You don't have to do all of them either. If you can't get the reservation for the full 5, you could hike into one for a night or 2 and then back out, and people do that. And there's another one in Sequoia National Park called Bear Paw Meadow, but they only have one. And that one is, I think, a great option too, because it gets you pretty far into the backcountry where you can do some great hiking from there, some great day hiking from Bear Paw Meadow, and you could stay at that backcountry camp for a few nights. I've gone through Bear Paw Meadow a few times on longer backpacking treks. Bear Paw Meadow is it's on the High Sierra Trail. So if you're doing anything along that route, you go through there. But that's another opportunity where you can have a sort of camp set up in the backcountry.
That is incredible. Very, very inspiring. I took some notes.
Okay,
to go.
Perfect. All right, last question. What's the one hike or trip that you've done besides this one that you think others shouldn't miss out on?
Yeah, I couldn't pick one. It's just basically everywhere from Northwest San Francisco up through the Point Reyes area we were talking about, the Marin Headlands, Mill Valley, Mount Tam, Presidio, Land's End, and San Francisco. That whole stretch is just such an incredible combination of beautiful ocean views, gorgeous trees, fun wildlife, accessibility to culture in the city, and good food. It's amazing that it's so close and accessible to so many people in the Bay Area and hopefully people that visit.
Yeah, that's actually really good advice, and I couldn't agree more. I've done some hiking out there. Like I mentioned, I did that hike on the Dipsea Trail where I stayed for a night and then hiked back. And I've actually been planning a trip that I haven't done yet that I'd like to do, where I want to go from the Golden Gate Bridge and then go up and stay at the campground at Mount Tam, because they have a hiker site. So they have a walk-in site for hikers that can't be reserved by car campers. And then you could do another day, although it's kind of a long day, but you could do another day to get to Samuel P. Taylor State Park and spend a night there. And then you can keep, if you wanted to keep going, go for another 10 or 11 miles before you get to a road. So there are ways to put together trips like that, even in that area, where you could do a couple of nights out if you wanted to make something like that happen. I'm going to try to make that happen. It's on my short list.
I'm inviting myself already. So yeah, right. there's a few free campgrounds there as well that are close to just gorgeous, gorgeous hikes. And then there's the Pelican Inn and Mountain Home Inn as well. If you
right.
I don't think they serve breakfast, so it's not quite the full amazing European or High Sierra situation, but there are lots of possibilities to connect things around there, and I think I need to do that as well.
Well, Eric Spamer, this has been great. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is so much fun. I really hope people apply for the Havasupai or Havasu Falls trip. And yeah, thank you so much for putting out these great episodes and inspiring so many people.
Thanks again to Eric Spamer for coming on the show. And I hope that we've inspired you to hike the Havasupai Trail. One note, in the end of the interview, we talked about my desire to hike the Golden Gate Bridge to Point Reyes. I actually went and did that hike recently. So that is no longer just a hope and a desire. It's a hike I did, and I may do an episode on it in the future. It was a really cool hike. I previously posted photos on the Instagram account of my encounter with a coyote during the hike. So check those out if you haven't seen them. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, tell a friend about it, or better yet, give us a good review on whichever podcast service you use. And keep in mind that this podcast is entertainment and meant to spark your interest. If you decide to hike the trail, do your own research. Like anything else worth doing, outdoor adventure has risk. So when you go, pack your common sense. And when you get back, tell me how it went, and I will feature you on our Walking the Walk segment. Next time on Trails Worth Hiking, we'll be doing something very different from lounging in desert canyon waterfalls. Instead, we'll be tackling what is often considered one of the most difficult treks in the world as we head back to the Himalayas for an epic multi-week adventure that has stunning beauty and high mountain passes. But no, we are not going back to Nepal just yet. This time we are going to be culturally immersed in a remote country that measures its gross national happiness rather than simply GDP, as we travel the Snowman Trek in the South Asian kingdom of Bhutan. If you have any questions or feedback on this episode, or ideas for future episodes, including if you want to be a guest and talk about a trail that you've hiked, reach out to me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com. One note, I just want to mention that I'm open to covering some shorter hikes, and not just the iconic ones like the Havasupai Trail. So if you have done a weekend hike that you really, really loved, that you think others should learn about, even if the episode would be shorter, I think that's fine. Maybe we could do a more streamlined episode and get that more quickly out to listeners so that they have info on shorter hikes as well. Anyway, just wanted to mention that they don't all have to be massive treks, and they don't all have to be epic locations. I know you live all over the world, and I want to cover hikes that are accessible to you wherever you are. All right, so that'll do it for this episode. So start planning your next hike, and before you know it, you'll be on the trail. Thanks for listening.